Well, Kim asked me to just help be a facilitator in the few minutes before she comes online. I think she's in the car traveling for just a few minutes. I'll give it a few more seconds for people to join in so we don't just jump into it. But I see there's a busy schedule. If you add up all the times of predicted, it's about the full meeting. So I won't wait too long. And I do see there's a Workstream Updates component at the very beginning. So I thought it would be good to start with those Workstream Updates in just a minute to two for each, unless anyone has any other quick business they'd like to bring up immediately. So hearing no other business, I'll turn it over to specification. I'm guessing that's Mark for just a minute to two, if possible, please, Mark.
Hey, so this is just the Workstream updates?
Yeah, just a Workstream update, please.
Okay. Yeah, so we met a couple times. We are still working through the scope for review 1.0, like what are the major things that we want in it. I don't think there's anything kind of ready to share yet, but we've been going through that and collectively reviewing a design proposal.
Great, thanks, Mark. I see positioning is next. A member of the positioning group, Melba, or someone else, you're free to take the
Yeah, I heard my name, but can people go on mute? Because I hear a lot of background noise, so I'm having a hard time hearing. Can you repeat that, John?
Yeah, sorry about that. I was just hoping you could do a positioning SIG update for a second, if you have anything to
Sure.
that you bring up.
Yeah, so we did meet once. We meet bi-weekly, so the next one will be coming up. Thought it was a pretty good meeting. We're talking about, what is our scope, right? I know the definition in the proposal is kind of like a one sentence, but we had some questions around, well, do we want to include other, governments, because a lot of this is about the White House executive order, but what about other standards, like let's say in the EU, et cetera? Also talking through how do we compare ourselves to new standards and frameworks. So there's a new GitHub issue talking about, I think it's about 6 different frameworks or standards and how Salsa compares. And so we're trying to get a set of criteria of how we assess those frameworks with regards to Salsa. So still in its initial phases, but I think it's going pretty well.
Great, thanks so much, Melba. And the third workstream update is tooling, which I'm guessing is Mike Lieberman.
Yep.
Oh, I see you. Over to you.
Sure. So yeah, quickly, we've mostly been going through, so we had the first meeting on last Friday. And so we've mostly been going through and trying to, one, figure out what categories of tools we need for Salsa. So stuff like builders, libraries that actually generate the specification, verifiers, policy tools, and so on. And so we built out a couple of categories there. And then we started sort of going through and listing individual tools, as well as sort of identifying where there are potentially gaps, and then kind of going to go from there and see what we can do to like where we should be prioritizing our efforts and what we might be able to do to start trying to also get additional folks involved, because right now it does seem like there's like a handful of folks who are like experts in Salsa, and they've been the ones mostly focused on the tools, and what can we do to kind of get just some additional folks from the community to start poking around, contributing to the existing tools, developing new tools, and so on.
Cool, thank you for the update. And I realized I skipped one important part of this call at the very beginning, so I'm sorry about that. But if there's anybody new who would like to introduce themselves, I invite you to say something. I can't easily scroll through right now. So please feel free to say hi if you're new.
So I can start. My name is Scott Hissam. I'm with the Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon University. And I'm trying to figure out the best pace to get engaged with Scorecard, best practices in that group. I see there's a tooling group tomorrow. I wasn't able to sit on the best practices one earlier this week. So I may be in the wrong place, but I'll start here. I can give you, so the quick 411 is I'm working with the U.S. Air Force, and we're looking at ways of getting insight into open source community practices with open source software projects, and being able to quantitatively assess the processes that are being used by those teams and be able to assess risk from that direction. That could be a Salsa kind of thing. It could be a Scorecard kind of thing. It could be a best practices or some combination thereof. Over.
Great. Thanks so much, Scott. I don't think you're in the wrong place. I suspect there are a lot of right places to be within OpenSSF and these related groups. So, and it certainly seems like there will be a tooling meeting again. I believe, is it next week? Is that right, Michael?
Can you repeat that?
Will there be a tooling meeting again next week? Is that
Oh,
correct?
yes. Oh, so yeah, there's two tooling. Just to make sure that to clarify, there's the general OpenSSF tooling meetings, which those are just sort of generic open source security things. And then there is every week on Friday, there is a Salsa tooling meeting, which is just as we begin to move towards 1.0, we want to make sure that we have a good set of tools and work streams building out these tools for Salsa. And so those two, so we're integrating with stuff like Scorecard, but we ourselves are not the ones who are, let's say, writing up Scorecard or writing up some of the other just sort of open source security tools.
And I see Laurent put in a comment too. Do you want to say anything? I was also, is that bi-weekly on Thursdays or Tuesdays? There was either a missing H or a changed R or E in that group. And I just want to make sure there was good information.
The bi-weekly Scorecard meeting is on Thursdays. Thursdays, yeah. And I work on the Scorecard project, so we'd be happy to have a chat if you want to engage more.
So I'm gonna listen in today, and I do have a lot of feedback on the Scorecard right now, but that's not for here. I will connect with the right group. Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Anybody else?
I can introduce myself. Hey everyone, my name's Chapman. I'm on the foundational infrastructure team at Bloomberg, focusing on supply chain security. I'm also a community contributor to Encore's Sift and Gripe products. I'm just really passionate about supply chain security and interested in kind of new and novel ways of producing SBOMs to reduce kind of noise and developer fatigue.
Great, thanks so much for coming.
I can introduce myself as well. I actually work with Chapman. Pretty new into the security supply chain space, but I attended the the supply open source summit in Austin about a month ago. So learned a lot about OpenSSF there and got interested in some of the initiatives. So good to meet you all.
Great, thanks for coming. Nice to meet you, Lisa. Anybody else?
Sure, I'll introduce myself. Hi, Gilbert Martin. Really interested in Salsa. I ran product security for a couple of companies. Really passionate about DevOps and security. I really like the whole transformation of culture. Breaking down the silos between security and DevOps. I'm aware of Salsa. I used it in my last company to start, enforcing security. I have ideas and thoughts that I'd love to contribute to. That's it. So thanks. And I did research a lot on you guys. So I've watched all the videos. I've listened to your last meeting. watch Josh and Tom video as well on how they explained. So yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks.
Great, thanks for joining. Anybody else?
Hello. Yeah.
Oh.
Hey, hi everyone. My name is Francis. I work at Google on the open source security team, and yeah, our scope is Alphabet more specifically. So happy to join in with the happy bunch here and learn more about Salsa and how this can actually work with us. So, thank you.
Great, thank you. Welcome, Francis. Anybody else?
This is Adrian. I can introduce myself. Hi, I'm Adrian Diglio. I'm from Microsoft. I lead the secure software supply chain team, and it's my first time dialing in. Just wanted to listen.
Great, thanks so much for joining.
I'll introduce myself. I'm Chris. I'm at Google. I just joined the open source security team, and I'm here to listen and learn.
Cool, thank you, Chris.
I guess real quick, I can also go. I'm Carrie Driscoll. I recently rejoined Google, working in the software supply chain integrity, specifically on SigStore. So excited to learn more about Salsa and how we interact.
Cool, thank you. Last call, anyone? Okay, hearing none. We've got a few items today, and some of them are a little bit longer, so we'll try to be quick. We have about 48 minutes right now, but Laurent has a 5-minute item, so I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So some context. We have been working on Salsa level 3 builders using GitHub Action. So for maintainers and projects that live on GitHub and release on GitHub, we have Salsa level 3 builders available. And recently we released something that we called a Salsa level 3 generator, which means that it only satisfies the provenance level 3. It's non-forgeable, but it doesn't satisfy the build level 3. In practice, what this means is that developers can continue, they don't have to change their release workflow, and they just need to add a step inside it to generate the provenance. And the provenance will have a binding to the repository name, the hash commit, the trigger, and so on and so forth. So it gives you strong provenance, a strong linking without major changes to the workflow for developers. We're working on a blog post for August 22nd, or like anytime this month. I've put some links about some examples, how you can upgrade a workflow for a user. We have a link also here that we're looking for help to drive adoption. So as I said, this is ready to use. We have compiled a list of maybe 40 projects that we could try to reach out to. Some projects that are critical and that we know are building on GitHub. And we're looking for people to help us with adoption. It can be as simple as selecting one project and trying to work with the maintainers to accept a pull request. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the roadmap. We are currently working on verification for the GCB Salsa builders, which are currently level 2 and will be soon-ish level 3. This is all happening in this other project called the Salsa Verifier that is also open source. We're also working on container support to build natively on GitHub. So container support can be 3 different things. Maybe you want us to build your container, and we can do that and give you a Salsa level 3 for build and provenance requirements. We can also just do the provenance part level 3 if users want to keep building the container themselves and just attach provenance. And then we have another project where we want to allow people to define their build, their release their release steps via a Docker file. So basically, it's like instead of using GitHub workflows to define it, the steps or a cloud build or any other configuration, we would use a Docker file, and we would use it to build the steps, and the output would be, say, in a particular folder, and we would add provenance to it and attest that it's that particular container that built the your binaries and so on and so forth. That's what we're working on right now, and we're also looking for the right ecosystem, package manager ecosystem, npm, Java, or anything else that you think we should build a builder for. We have all the basic blocks to do it. We know how to do it. It's just a few weeks worth of work, but we'd like to have some input on whether there's an ecosystem that is the right one that we should be looking at, these sort of things. Yeah, so sorry, a lot of information, but that was my update.
Well, that's very helpful. Does anybody have questions or anything they'd like to bring up?
So just one quick question. If folks wanted to sort of contribute to like anything that they wanted to add in there, what's the best way for folks to contribute?
So to contribute to the generators and the verifiers, you can go to the repositories, look at the issues, file issues, or tell us if you're interested in tackling some of those issues, or even if you think that the direction that we're taking, if you have some opinion on what ecosystem we should be spending more time on, we would love to hear it. So we do everything on the GitHub repo. The link, I shared a link about the list of repositories on GitHub that we're trying to reach out to. This is just a list that we've compiled ourselves. It's in no way exhaustive. It's not necessarily the right list. You should have right access to the document. I shared it to the Salsa discussion group this morning. So you can so if you want to engage on that side with adoption, you can add to this list, or you can select some of these projects and say that you want to own the relationship or try to work with them to adopt some of the builders. Michael, does that answer your question? Or?
Oh, yeah, no, that answers my question. Thanks.
And I see Trishank has a question or comment.
Oh yeah, thanks. First of all, this is very exciting. Looking forward to play with this. My question is actually related to a question that I want to raise later, but I wanted to just give a preview now. It's also related to a question that Joshua had asked on the GitHub issue. It's about mapping the public keys or identities, so to speak, to the steps. So very curious about that, but we can discuss this in more depth later.
Okay, so I'll wait for the later discussion.
Yeah, great. Sounds good.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks so much, Lauren. I see Mark dropped in a quick 1-minute point. Mark.
Yeah, to the because we had a bunch of new folks, which is great, and happy to have you here. At least one person mentioned have feedback or suggestions on Salsa. I think that suggested probably the best way to do that would be to write it up on a GitHub issue. You could try to find an existing issue or do a new one, and we could aggregate, but that's probably the best way to track because there's a lot of different people involved. And so we encourage any sort of comments or feedback through there. So thanks.
Great. Thanks, Mark. And next is one of the larger blocks. It's on a Salsa policy model for open source software packages. I'll turn to Viets. If it's possible to do this in 15 minutes, I'd appreciate it, but I know this is a meatier topic. So
yeah, I don't think I need 20 minutes. Let's see if this works. Can you see my slides?
Looks good.
Okay, let's start. This is Salsa policy model for OSS packages. This is work with Simon Kent, also with Mark Lodato, but it's really 2 persons doing this, not an army of Googlers that is bestowing this on the rest of the world. It would be nice if it goes on to the next page. So what I'm trying to achieve here, I want to present a high-level approach. Details are in the second half of this presentation that I will not present. I'm looking for some initial agreement that this is the right approach, that it solves the right problem, and invite people to work with us in a smaller group. Then this is a large audience, in a smaller group on the details of building this out. So next page. This is just to yes.
Just one quick comment, and also just a little bit more context on that. I think this is the type of thing that should probably go in one of the SIGs, but it's not clear which SIG because it's kind of partially like the model, which maybe would be specification, partially the tooling. And so I thought it'd be valuable to have this presentation as a larger group to kind of get everyone just a consensus on how policy even works, because everyone has a different idea.
Yep.
And then we could maybe break down details into one of the SIGs, and we could talk about which SIG that should be.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, it's multiple levels of figuring out how things should be done or may be done. This slide summarizes the Salsa supply chain model. I'm just presenting it because it will be easier to understand where policy is going to fit in. So we have a supply chain integrity model. There are threats and mitigations, the little things in red. There are requirements defined that address threats, and they are conveniently grouped into Salsa levels, so you don't have to talk about individual remedies all the time. And I omitted the dependency part, which is just a repetition of the other ones. So next slide shows where the policy would fit in. A project maintainer builds a package from source, and at the point where they want to publish it in a package repository, they can apply a Salsa policy based on build provenance and decide if the package is acceptable for publication. So that's on the publishing side. But on the installation, the download side, we have basically the same policy, of course, the same provenance. It can be used to decide that the package is indeed what it should be. And what it should be is a subject of the next slide. Questions so far? I guess not. So here we come to purpose and what the package should be. It is necessary, absolutely. I don't think that there is disagreement on that you need a secure build system in order to produce a package that is secure. But it's not sufficient. There also needs to be a policy that says, if you build this package, it has to be built from this source code, not something else. That's a step that is not immediately obvious to lots of people. So I will illustrate that with the next slide, which shows the top is a package is built from source. X is the name of a package. It could be a Python package or something. It is built with a build system. There's a policy check. Does it have, say, Salsa for provenance? And the build has produced Salsa for provenance. And so the check passes. The package is published to a repository. And then later, somebody wants to install the package on the system. They can run this check again. Does it have Salsa for provenance? Yes. And they install the package. And why is Salsa level 4 provenance alone not sufficient? Well, the next example below shows a fork of the package with some, malware added. Could be a Bitcoin generator or something that steals credentials or exfiltrate other secrets. You have a fork of the same package, but it is different. Use the same build system. It produces Salsa for provenance, so it passes the policy. The package is published, and when somebody wants to install the package, they apply the policy check. Does it have Salsa for provenance? Yes, it does. and the package is installed, but it's the wrong software. And so the purpose of the policy should be to ensure that this given package is actually built from a specific source code that it should be built. There is a recent article in bleepingcomputer.com about malicious forks of legitimate repos. I did not read it in detail, but 35,000 code repos seems like a lot. Are we still good? Okay, I will move on. So the lesson here is that say you have a Salsa 4 artifact. That doesn't by itself mean much because it could be Salsa 4 malware. So obviously you want to be able to distinguish between Salsa 4 malware and Salsa 4 legitimate code. And so therefore, the Salsa level is meaningful in a specific context. It's not just a label that you slap on any binary that gets built. Next up is if you have a policy that says this artifact must be built from this particular collection of source, then by its very nature, the policy is project specific. You cannot just have a policy that says it must be Salsa 4. You need a policy that says it must be Salsa 4 and it must be built from a particular source. And so that's what I'm trying to illustrate in the figure below. You have instances of source code revisions, you have instances of provenance and instances of artifacts. And that is all good, but you have a policy that is at the level of collections. It says artifacts in the collection named Project X, Package X. They all need to be built from revisions from a source repository that contains the source code for Project X. It is simple as that. Project is the name that I use here. In different ecosystems, people use package name or group ID, artifact ID, but it's basically the thing that identifies, that distinguishes this software from other software by name. And name, of course, is not a strong indicator. Okay. What does policy look like? Without going into the details of policy syntax, the purpose of the policy should be clear now. Backing up, we have Salsa provenance attestations. Are basically statements of fact about a specific artifact. This one statement is about the source artifact mapping. This artifact, this source, that is the code identity. And it also has statements about threat mitigations. What source requirements were in effect to prevent certain attacks? And with different Salsa levels, those are different collections of mitigations. An integrity policy then is a collection of expectations with respect to Salsa provenance. For example, there is an expected source code, which looks like a URI pattern, and it corresponds to a particular field in a Salsa provenance attestation. There is an expected build system. I trust this build system, but I do not necessarily trust other build systems. That is a different field in the Salsa provenance. And at higher Salsa levels, you have an expectation that the dependencies will be complete. There is no unaccounted for software in this artifact. And that's a different field in the Salsa provenance. And reproducible build is an optional thing at the highest level. And it has its own field in Salsa provenance. And so it is conceptually, you can imagine that a policy is a declaration of these are the expectations that I have with respect to the contents of Salsa provenance. And they are not at the level of individual artifacts, but they're at the level of all artifacts in this family, this package family, must be built from with these expectations. So wrapping up, this high-level overview, we expect that policies will be maintained by maintainers, by the package maintainers, and that they will be discoverable in package, call this package metadata. There is a plan to implement a policy prototype evaluator for PI packages. We have chosen that as a possible target. We assume that attestation discovery will be solved in a different work stream. And there's a number of policy implementation issues that we have ideas for. They will be covered in the remaining slides that I will not present. But initially, there is no policy, there is no provenance. So we need to find a way to get some provenance. We could wait until enough people adopt the GitHub Salsa 3 compatible action, but that might take time. We could also rebuild packages and hopefully reproduce the binaries close enough that we can say, okay, this package is compatible with Salsa level 2 or something like that. And then develop policies for the packages that we can create provenance for. There is a concern about policy changes. If you have a policy and it says this thing must be built from this source, and suddenly the policy changes, and now it suddenly says a different source, then that could be a security violation. And so we have to come up with a way to do that. There are some ideas in the remainder of the slides. There's also.
So, excuse me, I had a question.
Yes.
Yeah. So, do you come up with some way to sign and reference what signatures you allow on the provenance, or is that kind of out of scope for what you're trying to do here?
It is basically part of the trusted builder.
Yeah, but yes. the human that set up the policy, he has to sign the policy, or is it just open the clear?
The policy is not signed as such, at least in the current design draft that we have. The policy is just a thing, and the idea is that if you never seen the policy before, then you might think that it's probably safe to use because in the absence of evidence to the contrary, and then you keep using that policy until it changes, and then you look if the change is okay or not. But this gets into details that
I just wanted to know if you'd written up your thoughts in this area or not, or whether it was still out of band.
There are thoughts about this, how to authenticate a change in policy, for example. And the last one is not everybody trusts the same builders to the same degree. Google might trust its own builders more than other builders, and the same thing for other companies. And so we anticipate that there will be a need for limiting the trust in certain attestations. And so that's also an idea that we have in our draft. I think I'll stop here because it's a busy schedule, but also because if you go into details, then things get hairy really quickly.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I think there actually might be a question or two that already came up in the chat. I saw Sebastian and Trishant talking about a potential question, so that could be an opportunity. But if others have questions too, feel free to raise your hand.
Yeah, there's 3 of us with raised hands. I just don't know who went first.
I'm not sure.
It's you, Melba.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. How do you know if it's me? Like, does it do it in order?
Yeah, it usually does it in order.
Oh, okay. So I appreciate the presentation. I definitely love this idea. This is something that I mentioned a couple weeks ago, right? If you have garbage in, you have garbage out.
Yes.
It doesn't matter if it has Salsa attestation or not, or Salsa level 4 certification. Now, I know, Salsa currently doesn't make any claims about the trustworthiness of code. But I would challenge the group to say, why not? Because me as a company, why am I going to go through the trouble of being Salsa certified if I can't trust the code? Right? I'd rather just get, ISO certifications or SOC certifications and, do it on my own versus having to go through yet another thing. So again, I would challenge the group to think about how can we make this into Salsa spec somehow, right? Don't just say it doesn't claim it now, but ultimately, if nobody's going to use Salsa, if you can have garbage in, garbage out, we need a way to solve that problem.
It is a problem. The one that we're addressing here is integrity. Is the source code faithfully transcribed into code, and is the source code maintained according to certain processes? But code quality is as important, but it's a different problem. I can imagine that Salsa is extended with things like security checks must be run over the code in order to blah blah blah. But that is probably a different thing. I'll stop here.
Thank you. I see Sean also has a question.
Yeah, so I was wondering about the requirements for the source that it was built from. How do you think that we could accommodate third-party builders who build from mirrored source code and can prove that their mirrors match the original source?
Yeah. If it's a Git clone, Git mirror, then you should have a commit hash that identifies the exact thing, right? If it's
Right. So we're not mirroring it in Git. We're, because we actually draw from many different repositories,
right,
not just GitHub. So yeah, we have a whole bunch of different things, but we have, we mirror and we can maintain checksums and signatures if they're available for anything that we mirror. So we can prove that, given at that time that we mirrored it, it matched what we got. But yeah, we're not necessarily using, or we are not using Git as a model for our mirror store.
Right. I'm familiar with source control systems that have a commit number, basically. And there, the number describes the entire states of the repository. So it is sufficient to, if your checks were done that the code was identical to the mirror, that should be sufficient to know that it was identical, and it will forever be identical at that particular commit number.
Right.
But it's difficult to prove that to other people, of course.
It is. And we could say in our attestations that we built direct from the source code, but that kind of hides the fact that we've mirrored the source code. And I would rather not do that. I would rather be open and clear that we're building from our local mirror, mostly because we know that things out in Git can change at the end of the day. Right, Git allows you to rewrite history. So yeah, we have a nice a contained static set of source code that doesn't change. But yeah, it's just how do we put that into an attestation and say, and still meet the requirement that we built from the original source?
Good. It's a good question. Thank you.
I see one more hand raised. Trishank has his hand raised.
Great, thanks. Yeah. So great presentation. Sorry, how do I say your name?
Wietse.
Perfect. Okay, great. Thanks. And I want to be mindful of time. Sorry. Great.
No, very good.
I want to be mindful of time also. I don't want to take up too much time, but I want to get everyone's attention to a few important issues here. So first of all, great presentation. Loved how visual it was and how you spoke in plain English. Love it. I need to copy your tricks. I'm going to try to speak in English myself. So let me share my screen and see if that, oh, is it okay if I share my screen?
Yes, I will. Can I stop sharing? Oh, here.
Great, thanks. I'll make
Done.
this very quick. So I think it's a great problem in Toto land. What we call Salsa attestations are in Toto land, also in Toto attestations, sometimes called links in the old language. Now I think to ask Sebastian's question, Salsa policies are very interesting because it reminds Sebastian and myself of something called in Toto root layouts, which is slightly different, but I think is related. And I don't think we should figure it out in this meeting. Of course not, but over time. Something that layouts do, I think, one thing that they do is define the steps in your pipeline and what sequence and who is supposed to sign for what attestation. And I think there's a feature called inspection, which I believe, if I understand correctly, maps to policies. So that's something that I'd like us to explore. The other question comes back to authenticity. So far, I think we all agree that Salsa does a fantastic job at solving the integrity problem end to end, right? This is, just like Witsa was talking about. The problem is if you don't solve the authenticity problem, you basically have Salsa for malware. So you have integrity, but for malware. And to try to solve the authenticity problem, one thing that you talked about was how to distribute the policies or layouts, whatever we end up calling them, securely, especially in places like PyPI. So for bootstrapping processes, I agree, we can try something out based on Tofu. But I think eventually we will need like a secure way to do it, securely map policies to artifacts. Otherwise, we don't have the authenticity thing. So there's a few proposals here. There's an IT that Santiago and myself wrote for Intoto. It's something that I'd like to discuss in the future. And it reminds me of the idea. I'll stop. I don't think I need the time slot later because I wanted to revisit today something Joshua Locke and I had discussed a few months ago, which was how do we define the shape of the pipeline and who is supposed to sign for which attestation? And then we can talk about how that relates to policies. I just wanted to bring everyone's attention to these problems that we needed to solve. And I think it'll be great. I think we can solve that as part of policies.
So which IT number is that?
Oh, I'll paste the link here.
All right, thanks.
I do.
Trishan, if I'm understanding correctly then that you actually brought up the item you were going to discuss later. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. So we don't need to revisit it. I just wanted to bring everyone's attention to this is a problem we had partly discussed before. Policies does a lot more. But the problem I wanted to talk about is it's about time we figure out how to specify public keys or identities to steps. And then in turn to policies themselves. So.
Well, I was thinking of giving 15 minutes to that other group, so we could still spend a couple minutes here on this if anyone has questions now for Trishank on the Salsa public key distribution or Joshua. So if anyone wants to ask questions or make comments, we don't have to move on this second. I see a question from Mark and from Roy.
Yeah, so I think like what I'd like to do is for the next step is to figure out like how to move this forward. My big goal is I worry about discussing the details of like, for example, using in toto or specific key formats or like that. I'd like to first get broad documented agreement that we all kind of speak the same language and think the same way about how the overall model works. And that's why I do like Vita's diagram because it does keep it very high level. Because I think each of us, I've noticed in conversations, each of us, if we might use the same words, but we kind of mean slightly different things. I think we all have a slightly different model in our heads of what we're trying to do and how it works. And so if we could get that nailed down first, that I think would be a big first step. And I don't know what a good group for that would be. Like, should we do that in the specification SIG? Should we do it in the tooling SIG? It seems like it kind of straddles both, if anyone has thoughts.
specification.
Mark.
So I think Joshua
Roy?
said, oh, sorry. Joshua, did you say something?
I was going to agree. I think specification makes sense because I'd like to see it be part of the specified like Salsa.
Hold on, sorry. I actually disagree here because I actually agree with Mark that we need to nail down the terminology and make sure. So I'm not sure that we should jump to spec right away where we discuss minutia as opposed to the problem, but maybe I'm missing something here.
It's more just where we should be having that discussion, because there's a bunch of other work streams that we've sort of split out while we push Salsa to 1.0.
Yeah, fair. We got to start somewhere. I'm sure we'll figure it out.
Roy?
Yeah, well, similar to Mark's question, I'm still trying to struggle how this relates to large incremental build systems where you're only building part of the product. This sounds like a lot of direction of forcing things from the bottom up versus, hey, the only people that can sign the out product is yourself. So whether you attest to the inputs and have to check all the signatures there seems to be a little bit of cart and a horse problem. And that's why I struggle with and agree with Mark that trying to figure out what the terminology is and where this sits is key to moving forward here.
So note that this is scoped to open source. And
so anything we say that's open source is consumed by commercial products. So we basically want to carry it through even to them. So I wouldn't like to, I understand it's an interesting use case, but let's not restrict ourselves to only open source. Because SolarWinds used what they believed was a protected build system, and the fact that they hijacked it underneath the covers was immaterial to the build system. It was the OS compromise that they got onto the box. And anybody that says, hey, the box is protected, needs to just look at the last 40 years of every time we've made that claim. There's always been a backdoor found. So that's why I'm struggling here.
Yeah, I
Sounds
think
like
maybe. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I don't think we're gonna be able to answer that right now, and we still have one more sort of topic. So do we want to put a pin in that and then kind of get back to it maybe in one of either in Slack or something like that?
That sounds like a good motion.
I was going to let Mark have his say, and then yeah, I agree.
I was going to say that. I think it's a really important point, and I do want to follow up. Let's try to find another avenue that would be good to discuss that.
Okay, great, thank you. So there's one remaining major agenda item for today, and I see 4 different presenters associated with it. So whoever would like to present, please do.
Awesome. Yeah, so I think a couple of us on the call, myself, Michael, Mihai, Paf.
Hold on a second. Can anybody see the slides, or is it just say has started screen sharing?
I'm also seeing that started screen sharing.
There it goes.
Okay, is it good now?
Good.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure how much we can get through this. So I don't know whether maybe if we don't get through it, we can continue next week. So just kind of a little bit of context around this, and I think I'll get as far as I can, and we'll figure out if we have to continue next week. So back to kind of this links up with a little bit of what we just mentioned about discovery or attestations, as well as the trustworthiness of the particular properties of artifacts that have Salsa attestations. So this is a piece of work that we've initially started. We're calling AFF graph, or artifact fact finder, and this is kind of bootstrap currently between a couple of us from Google, from Kusari, as well as Santiago from Purdue University. And yeah, so I'm gonna go through kind of a little bit about it, and hopefully this will solve some of the problems that we talked about, policy, about figuring out, discovering properties of artifacts. So the motivation for this is we are starting to see a lot of security documents being generated, whether this be Salsa, whether it be SBOM, VEX documents, and just in total attestations in general. And we also have like vulnerability scans, certification checks for more like internal kind of configuration management database kind of things. And basically a bunch of many different documents, right, that do various different things. So the problems that we're trying to address is that we have all these documents. First of all, how do we link these documents together? You have different ecosystems that generate their own sets of provenance. So that's one thing. How do we figure out which artifacts and mapping to each other, and to be able to discover the different sorts of documents from the root node of a tree all the way to its leaves. The second part of this also, the various documents. For example, Salsa, we have supply chain information. For SBOM, we have dependency information. We have vulnerability information. How do we kind of put this together and kind of reconcile all the identifiers so that we can get meaningful information from the graph? So what AFF graph is really a knowledge graph of software metadata to answer security and supply chain questions. Cool. So what kind of supply chain or security questions do we have? So this kind of falls into three broad categories, but there are other use cases as well. One is like proactive, how do I prevent large scale supply chain compromises? Example of this is, the XKCD comic. The idea is like, how do we identify what are some of these projects? I believe, the regular expression libraries, there's something Santiago found, as well as SCD is kind of like the basis of a lot of different libraries. And, maybe we should put more effort into that. Preventive, this is more from an organization standpoint, where if I want to run a particular binary or particular workload in my cluster, I want to ensure that it has also provenance, it has gone through vulnerability scans, it has all the necessary security checks and approvals, and I have evidence of that I can use for compliance. And finally, reactive is, how am I affected? The big question that people ask, Log4j happens, Log4j happens, Heartbleed, supply chain compromises, really, how am I affected? What do I need to do to respond to this? And the idea is by collecting all the documents and creating meaningful relationship and resolving the identifier information between them, we'll be able to ask these questions about our organization and the software that we use. So this is a broad overview of kind of like the architecture. On the left-hand side here, we just have a bunch of documents that we're ingesting, a couple categories of things, things from public record, from Sigstore, from GitHub, vulnerability information for OSV.dev. So this will provide a bunch of documents about open source libraries and open source applications. We also have organizations that develop their own software. These may be private. They may store these documents within internally in their own databases, in their own cloud storage. And finally, we also have vendors, such as those that do vulnerability checks and certifications that are able to say, this particular piece of software has been checked for vulnerabilities, and here's a certification or attestation for it. And the idea of that is that taking all these things together, we can ingest and process them, extract from each document the information, the relationships we want from them, and create a graph of how the artifacts relate to attestations and relate to the identities of those attestations, and be able to ask questions about this graph. Awesome. So two major use cases. One is a public monitor. So for example, a public good service that's run for open source libraries and applications. For example, a Sigstore monitor. This would ingest all verifiable documents for public records and make a public graph that is queryable from everyone. And then we also see a big deployment use case being organizations where I have a bunch of software that I use both from open source and what I develop internally or use from other vendors. And so what happens is my graphs ingest like all my internal documents as well as the relevant parts of the public graph. And mainly it's going to be only queryable within organization. Yeah. And this is more to kind of like answer questions about my organization rather than just open source libraries and applications in general. So the vision of this is, I think that we're seeing is that how the ecosystem will look like is that we have a bunch of public graphs, right? Every package manager, every individual ecosystem may have a graph of information about their open source libraries, about their packages. And what happens then is like these graphs would, be connected to each other in some manner. For example, containers would use like different packages from PyPI, maybe Java packages, and so it would kind of reference each other's graphs. And the idea here is that organizations like private organizations like Coke or Pepsi would have their own internal graph with their own internal applications, and then they would kind of cross-reference with public open source graphs. I think that's kind of like where we're seeing in the future, but I think the more likely outcome of this would be, to start, we would have something like a 6-star monitor graph, which would take out the attestation for 6-star and also put it in a public graph, and this will kind of encapsulate the various different aspects of the ecosystem. We also envision that there may be provider graphs, right? For example, each cloud provider that releases a bunch of images, for example, Red Hat would have its own graph for all the images and all the packages that it publishes. Maybe the Google Shared OSS may have its own graph as well. And then that would be how the private organizations will query to it. So 3 minutes left, gonna quickly go through this. 2 types of query. One's informational query is like, am I affected by this particular vulnerability? The idea is here, it's like you get a set of nodes back and then you can kind of triage that. We also have evidence-based queries to how do I make a policy decision? Back to the policy discussion, provide evidence that policy is fulfilled. So this will return the subgraph. There's a bunch of math around like why these 2 queries are different. I don't want to go into the math right now since we're short on time. So design philosophy and pluggability, we want this to be broad as possible. We have pluggable implementations for all the different data sources. We want to have pluggability for document handlers. We're going to have a predicate dictionary of what are properties that are important to people. What do we take the Salsa attestation? What are the information we extract out of it? SBOM, what information do we want out of the SBOM to be able to make these questions about trustworthiness of the actual applications that go through the supply chain, and being able to map the properties to the correct artifacts. Big part of this, obviously, policy and trust. Being able to say who we trust, what we trust, is important to us. We are built on open source. We're using Neo4j for Graph Database, GraphQL for Graph API. And I think one big important thing is like we are kind of prioritizing scale here, because what we're seeing from chatting with folks and also doing our own experiments is that supply chain graphs get really, really, really big really fast. At least that's the situation today. So we're thinking about scale quite a bit. I'm going to skip this slide. Projects hosted in this GitHub repo, artifact-ff /artifact-ff. We are still in early development. We are looking for many contributors. There's an issue open. Please fill it in if you're interested in contributing, and we'll gladly connect with you. We also are gathering a set of folks to be technical advisory members to inform the project. The project is still a developer's first project, so anything that technical advisory members provide will be more of an informed basis. And we are going to be talking about this at KubeCon in October in Detroit as well. I don't think I have time for questions, but.
Is there a place to ask questions? Is it best to go to the GitHub or somewhere else?
I think for now, GitHub will be the best place to do that.
Sounds great. Thanks so much for the presentation, Brandon, and everyone associated with this. Really cool initiative. I think we're out of time, unfortunately. Thanks everyone for coming today, and it's nice to see so many new faces too. And hopefully see you all in Slack.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks for running the meeting, John.
Yeah, I'm sorry for being an interloper to help run it, but I thought Kim said she was traveling, so I was glad to help out. So
yeah, you did a great job, much better than I would have done. So thanks for that.
Very good. Glad to help.
Yes. Bye.